Honorable Vice Chancellor, Indira Gandhi National Open University, Professor Nageshwar Rao sir, Pro Vice Chancellor of IGNOU, Professor Sumitra Kukreti ma'am, Professor R.P. Das sir, Professor Satyakant sir, Professor Uma Kanjilal ma'am, our distinguished guest for today's webinar, Professor Girishwar Mishra sir, former Vice Chancellor, Mahatma Gandhi Antarashtriya Hindi Vishwavidyalaya, Varda, Ms. Amita Mehra, founder, Gnostic Center, Sri Aurobindo Studies, Dr. Monica Gupta, University of Delhi, all the directors, registrar, heads of division, and distinguished delegates. Poet, revolutionary, philosopher, rishi, and yogi. Sri Aurobindo was one of the leaders of the freedom movement who strove for India's complete independence. Sri Aurobindo's philosophical thoughts and principles of teaching are utmost important if a human being wants to live in peace and harmony. In the global era, his philosophy is very much relevant to achieve and maintain permanent peace in the world. He developed his own vision of human progress and spiritual evolution. The central theme of Aurobindo's all work is the evolution of human life into life of divine. He wrote that man is a transition being. He is not final. The step from man to Superman is the next approaching achievement in the earth evolution. It is inevitable because it is at once the intention of inner spirit and the logic of nature's process. According to Sri Aurobindo, real education provides a free and creative environment to a child to grow him mentally, morally, aesthetically, and help to enhance his inner interest and creativity, and finally lead to the development of his spiritual power. He pursued the internal yoga, which aims at synthesis of spirit and matter, at human unity in a rich diversity, and a total transformation of this early life into divine. A human being now engaged in searching the peace and happiness, but according to his own word, true happiness lies in the finding and maintenance of natural harmony of spirit, mind, and body. In the midst of the darkness and distress of today's world, Aurobindo provides a ray of hope to mankind. He envisaged a new man, a new society, and new civilization. To commemorate the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo, School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies, IGNOU, is organizing a national webinar on philosophical contributions of Sri Aurobindo. On this auspicious occasion, it is indeed a great pleasure and honor for me to extend a very warm and hearty welcome to our honored guest and keynote speaker of today's webinar, Professor Girishwar Mishra, former Vice Chancellor, Mahatma Gandhi Antarashtriya Hindi Vishwavidyalaya, Varda. And I sincerely thank him for gracing this occasion and sharing his knowledge and experience with us. I also extend a very warm welcome to our esteemed PVC, Professor Sumitra Kukreti ma'am, and Professor R.P. Das sir, Professor Satyakant sir, Professor Uma Kanjilal ma'am, and also take this opportunity to express our gratitude for their gracious presence. We are delighted to have the gracious presence of our esteemed speaker, Ms. Amita Mehra, founder, Gnostic Center, Sri Aurobindo Studies, and Dr. Monica Gupta, Department of Elementary Education, Gargi College, University of Delhi. We warmly welcome you, ma'am. I also extend a very warm welcome to all the directors, registrars, heads of divisions, distinguished delegates, colleagues, students, and everyone who has joined us virtually today. This webinar on the philosophical contribution of Sri Aurobindo aims at exploring the philosophical insight emanating from the intersection of Sri Aurobindo's understanding of human nature, as well as the ultimate purpose of evolution, which he posited to be the realization of Satchidanand. To conclude, Dr. S. Radhakrishnan once said, and I quote, Aurobindo was the greatest intellectual of our age and major force for the life of the spirit. India will not forget his services to politics and philosophy, and the world will remember with gratitude his valuable work in the realm of philosophy and religion. With these words, I once again welcome you all and extend my sincere thanks for your gracious presence, please. Now, I request our Honorable PVC, Ma'am, Professor Sumitra Kukreti, to please deliver the presidential address. Ma'am, please.
Thank you, Professor Shachi Shah. Good morning to all of you. This is really a very delighted moment for me to join this webinar. Henry Longfellow has stated years ago, lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime and departing leave behind us footprints on the sand of time. Actually, Henry Longfellow's words stand as testimony while thinking about Sri Aurobindo and his philosophy. I'm thinking on this moment that how can Sri Aurobindo be introduced? Words have their own limitations. Every feeling, thought, and personality cannot be introduced through words. A great philosopher, spiritual leader, successful teacher, a devotional poet, a political thinker, and freedom fighter. In all these aspects, the impact of Sri Aurobindo transcends the boundaries of time and space. He guided humanity to live a meaningful life. The personality of Sri Aurobindo is a fine semblance of spiritualist, educationist, yogi, and philosopher. As Professor Shachi has already spoken in her introductory remarks, that as a mystic philosopher and a great spiritual guru, Sri Aurobindo established himself on lofty perch among Indic tradition of saints and philosophers. Maharshi Aurobindo is one of the rare saints and philosophers who is revered all over the world, whose fame transcends beyond the boundaries of nations. He has been called India's greatest modern philosopher sage. With publication of Savitri and the Life Divine, he tried to make people realize that the foremost aim of human life is to advance towards realizing the divine, God. His integral yoga, his fresh approach towards spirituality, and his divine gift to analyze wisdom makes him certainly unparalleled in modern India. The most fascinating aspect of his character is that, unlike other intellectuals and Indian saints who would passively debate over the curse of slavery in the comfort of their drawing rooms, he was completely devoted to the cause of Indian freedom struggle. Such was his involvement that he not only sacrificed his lucrative and prestigious job, but he also served a sentence in Alipur prison for producing revolutionary literature. Sri Aurobindo gave a new life to Indian freedom struggle and played the role of a front-runner leader for quite some time. Of his revolutionary activities, he underwent spiritual revelation, which culminated in his transformation into a yogi. He instilled the feelings of national integration in people, along with guiding the path to spiritual enlightenment for the beleaguered humanity. Undoubtedly, by blending Indian transcendental spiritualism and Western materialism, the philosophy evolved in the form of integral yoga is the true semblance of Aurobindo's intellectual genius. He believed that the soul or psyche is immutable only in the sense that it contains all the possibilities of divine within it. But it has to evolve them. In integral yoga, the goal is to move towards inside the inner being and discover the psychic being which can then bring about a transformation of the outer nature. This psychic transformation is the decisive moment that enables a never ending progress in life through the power of connecting to one's inner spirit or divine essence. Sri Aurobindo had firm belief that if India would regain its old spiritual heritage and if it would live up to its ideals of universal brotherhood, Vasudha Kutumbakam, the day is not far when it would reacquire the status of Vishwaguru. He was completely devoted to Indian culture, Indian values, and Sanatan Hindu Dharma. Actually, he believed in the theory that whenever any nation was uprooted from its basic culture and lost its purpose of being, the growth of that country stopped immediately. And if India wants to remain India, it must remember its cultural legacy. Quite at the same time, he was perfectly aware of the glorious past of India, but the degradation of the nation was pinning in his heart. He had firm belief that our Vedas, Upanishads, Purans, epic and Vedic literature are source of immense knowledge, and this knowledge should be utilized for human welfare. Propagating the theory of world citizenship, he established an ashram in Aurobindo, Pondicherry. And I know that all of us are familiar with the name of Aurobindo today. At present, there are more than 300 Aurobindo ashrams enlightening people to change their life, where people travel from all over the world to quench their spiritual thirst. Complexities of modern life, heart-wrenching as these are, have been casting negative impact on human psyche. And particularly in the present time, on account of rising ambitions and cutthroat competition, modern man is constantly facing challenges to maintain mental equilibrium. For all such people, the philosophy of Aurobindo and his thought comes as a source of great relief. I'm very happy that SOITS has taken this initiative in the direction to pay homage to Sri Aurobindo. Hope this national webinar on Sri Aurobindo's contribution to psychology would do relevant intervention in this context, as it would provide an opportunity to relive his message. The keynote speaker, Professor Girishwar Mishra ji, is a great academician and renowned figure in the field of psychology. He would unravel the integral philosophy of Sri Aurobindo. The other speakers, Ms. Amita Mehra and Dr. Monica Gupta, are also closely associated with the philosophy of Sri Aurobindo. I'm sure their deliberations would be thought-provoking for the participants. I congratulate Professor Shachi Shah, Director SOITS, and the entire school for organizing this webinar, and wish this school a great success. Thank you. Over to Professor Shachi Shah.
Thank you, Honorable PVC ma'am, for your very thought-provoking and eloquent speech. Now I request Professor Nandini Sinha ma'am to kindly introduce the guest and start the proceeding, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sachi Shah. And I take this opportunity to thank our Honorable Pro Vice Chancellor ma'am, Professor Sumitra Kukleti ji, for the very insightful presidential address. She has introduced us to variety of aspects of Sri Aurobindo's philosophical contributions, spirituality, Indian freedom movement, and his personality. With that, I now come to a very brief introduction of the theme of this webinar this morning, philosophical contributions of Sri Aurobindo. Just a few words that this webinar on the philosophical contributions of Sri Aurobindo aims at exploring the philosophical insights emanating from the intersections of Sri Aurobindo's understanding of human nature, as well as the ultimate purpose of evolution, which is posited to be the realization of Satchidananda. Sri Aurobindo's conceptions of human nature, human consciousness, its evolution, and associated idea of integral psychology have been noteworthy contributions, which have the progression of contemporary Indian philosophical thinking. Sri Aurobindo has argued that divine Brahman or Satchidananda through the supermind descends into mind matter and represents the ultimate knowledge and power. Instead of positing this world, the world we experience as an illusion, Aurobindo argues that the world can evolve and become a new world with new species. According to Sri Aurobindo, then, the highest end of world also include a descent of the divine into the world in order to transform it into a divine existence. He has also held that man is an intermediate creature based firmly in the material consciousness and yet reaching towards the divine consciousness. That is, into what Aurobindo later calls the supramental. Aurobindo also emphasizes that man has the capacity to cooperate with the evolutionary thirst and thereby to speed up the process of evolution itself. With that very brief introduction of the theme, now I welcome the keynote speaker of this morning, Professor Keshwar Mishra ji. Just a brief introduction of Professor Mishra. He is a very well-known social scientist, psychologist, and author from India. He obtained his master's and PhD in psychology from Gorakhpur University. He started his career as a lecturer in Gorakhpur University. Thereafter, he remained a reader with Allahabad University, a professor with Bhopal University, and then joined as a professor, Department of Psychology, University of Delhi, where he served for the rest of his career. In 91-92, Professor Mishra was a Fulbright Fellow in the United States at Swarthmore College and at the University of Michigan. He was the Vice Chancellor of Mahatma Gandhi Antarashtriya Hindi Vishwavidyalaya in Wardha. Professor Mishra has been Chief Editor of the 5th ICSSR Survey of Psychology published by Indian Council of Social Science Research. For 15 years, until the end of 2015, he was the editor of Psychological Studies. He has also been a special issue editor of Psychological Studies. He was awarded a national award in the field of social science in the year 2009 by the government of Madhya Pradesh. Besides, he has other large number of awards and distinctions. Some of his published works include, he has published works both in English and Hindi. I'll just name a few in English. Psychological Consequences of Prolonged Deprivation, Perspectives on Indigenous Psychology, Psychological Perspectives on Health and Stress, Applied Social Psychology, Towards a Culturally Relevant Psychology, Rethinking Intelligence, Psychology and Societal Development, Paradigmatic and Social Concern, among many more such publications. Professor Mishra has adorned a large number of administrative assignments, such as Dean Research, Humanities and Social Sciences, Delhi University. He's been a board member, Asian Association of Indigenous and Cultural Psychology, member of the International Advisory Board of Center for Indigenous and Cultural Psychology, Indonesia, member Executive Committee, National Academy of Psychology, Chairman Psychology Curriculum Committee, and many more such assignments. He has taught a large number of courses both at master's and doctoral levels. His areas of specialization include social psychology, human development, cultural and indigenous psychology, a study of self, and effective process. With that brief introduction, now I invite Professor Keshwar Mishra ji to deliver his keynote speech on Sri Aurobindo's vision of human evolution. Sir.
Om Tat Saviturvaram Rupam Jyoti Parasya Dhimahi Yanna Satyena Deepaye. Professor Kukreti, Pro Vice Chancellor, Indira Gandhi National Open University, Professor Nandini Sinha, Professor Shachi Shah, and my esteemed colleagues who have joined this webinar, I express my gratitude to all of you who have thought about organizing this very important meeting. It's a meeting of minds about a person who has provided a new paradigm to think. It's great opportunity for us that we are able to understand the world in a different light. Sri Aurobindo happens to be a Yuga Purush. If you look at his life, the happenings in his life, the transformation and change that has taken place in his life, you will see that, yes, there is real movement of consciousness taking place. The young child at the age of 7 years is sent to England to prepare himself as an ICS officer. And he ultimately decides that no, it's of no use. And knowingly, he keeps himself away, and we know the life of Sri Aurobindo, that he comes back to India, and after a kind of self-introspection, study, adhyavasaya, and his work as a teacher at Baroda, all those experiences led to transformation. And in 1906, he starts editing Bande Mataram. And the goal of Bande Mataram was nothing less than absolute national autonomy. See the words. Even today we don't have that absolute national autonomy. Yes, we are free. We are free in a political sense, but still we don't have the Swaraj of ideas. Here we find a person who has tried to understand what the pattern of Indian thought has been, how it has grown. And for more than 2 decades, almost 3 decades, he dedicated himself to the study of Vedas, Upanishads. And we know his writings and his contributions and his movement towards yoga, integral yoga, and to create a new perspective to view the reality. It's a kind of intervention into the world of literature, the world of science, and the world of spirituality. I consider myself as a beginner, a student of his thought. My younger colleagues, Ms. Mehra and Dr. Monica Gupta, are well versed with the work of Sri Aurobindo, and I'm delighted that they are going to share their understanding, the experiential understanding that they have. In the next few minutes, I would like to touch some of the key concerns and ideas of Sri Aurobindo about human evolution. I must admit that the writings of Sri Aurobindo require a lot of effort, intellectual effort to understand, and it is quite difficult. It requires patience. You need to read and understand that in detail. So it will not be possible to provide the entire framework. I will just provide a very simple sketch of his main ideas about his perspective on human evolution. The word evolution is very familiar to us. We know about Darwin and we know about his idea, and the implications of his ideas are well known to us. We know how changes took place and the shape that we have today, what we call a human being, has a long history. Now, the meaning of evolution and the sense of evolution which Maharishi Aurobindo provides is complex and different than what Darwin talked about. And it's very interesting to see that Sri Aurobindo thinks about humanity, about life. And the background of that is something very important. I think those who have read the life story must be familiar with those episodes that in the jail, when he was put in jail for charges of various kinds, as he was a revolutionary and trying to unsettle the British Raj and the various kinds of efforts which he was doing. And in the jail, he had the experience, the feeling, in a very substantial way about Swami Vivekananda, Lord Krishna, and ultimately the message was that he has to go to follow the spiritual route. And then he moves to Pondicherry and he goes for sadhana, study, dedication, and the result is a number of, writings we know about that, Savitri, the life divine. You have so many things with us. I think the book on yoga, synthesis, is really a synthesis of all the systems and understanding that we have. Sometimes I feel that Lord Krishna wrote, or let us say, the Song of God, the Bhagavad Gita, is a marvelous piece of work. And after that, integrating the message of Gita and Upanishad and all the wisdom available in Vedas put together with a new mindset is available in the work of Sri Aurobindo. So it's quite complex. It has multiple roots and it really synthesizes the learning from Eastern tradition as well as learning from Western traditions. Let us try to understand in brief what is the sense and meaning of human evolution for Maharshi Aurobindo. I must tell you that some of the points which I am going to talk about have already been touched by Professor Shah, Professor Kukreti, and Nandiniji. And they have provided a very useful perspective on the thoughts of Sri Aurobindo. I again express my gratitude to them. Let me begin with the meaning of evolution which is available in the works of Sri Aurobindo, as I have understood. For him, evolution means the spirit's return unto itself. Now, there are two words, involution and evolution. Sri Aurobindo uses these words quite systematically, and he says that the meaning of evolution is, and meaning of involution, these two terms are very critical in his thought. In evolution, which is actually creation, the spirit projects itself out of itself. So, in evolution, it comes back to itself. Some authors think that it is the homecoming of the spirit. We also find two key words along with involution and evolution: descent and ascent. Now, the spirit has to come to matter. Now, this will be descent, and ascent or evolution is the process when you move upward. And it is very interesting to see that both the processes are interrelated. Ascent or evolution is only possible because there is descent. The two are interrelated. There is descent and then there is ascent. Matter can evolve because there has been a descent of the spirit into it. And same thing happens with life and mind. They evolve because there has been a descent of the spirit into it. Evolution also involves another important principle, and that is the principle of integration. What is the meaning of integration? Integration means integration of the higher with the lower ones. Sri Aurobindo also uses another important term, psychicization. The opening out of the psychic being within. Within dwells a spark of divinity. The Purush seated within our heart and he uses the word Chaitya Purush. So the transition to higher level is due to descent of a higher consciousness from above. I think here, evolution is not merely a chance event. It's not a mechanical event. It has a purpose. It has a goal. And as I have mentioned, and Professor Kukreti and Professor Shah has indicated, it is Satchidananda. And there is again, the whole evolution is ultimately moving towards Satchidananda, the homecoming. So the spirit is involved in matter, and that matter can evolve into life, and the same is true about the evolution of life into mind and of mind into the super mind. So evolution is return of spirit to itself. Evolution is meaningful. Evolution has a purpose. Evolution is something which moves ultimately towards Satchidananda. It is not mechanical. It is not just by chance that anything can happen. Now, the interesting part, and if you look at Bhagavad Gita, you will see Lord says the Angushta Matra, how dwelling of that great Paramasatta is in us. Similarly, if you read Ishavasya Upanishad, it says that Ishavasya sarvam yat kinchit jagatyam jagat. Whatever is present in this world is just occupied by God. So the presence of that Param Satta is everywhere. In fact, Mahatma Gandhi was also impressed by this whole verse, Ishavasaktena Bhunjitha Magradha Kasa Siddhanam, where he says that you have to do bhoga with the tyaga. It's not only bhoga and bhoga and bhoga. You are not a consumer because you are not a master. You are a trustee. And you have to take care of this world. Who are you to say that you own it? You are not owner. Anyway, so the idea which is with us in this process of evolution is very profound. It's great. And spirit, out of its own sheer joy of expression or lila, projected itself out of itself. And once it has projected, then it has to come back, it has to return. And this whole game or lila is there. And within this framework, everything happens. Now, the whole process of evolution cannot stop unless the highest stage of Satchidananda is reached. So this is the framework. Now, let me summarize this idea. Creation is downward movement of the spirit, and evolution is upward movement toward the spirit. Within Indian thought, there has been an understanding that whole thing is cyclical. There is a Srishti, and the Srishti continues for some time, and then there is Laya, Pralaya. So, you have Brahma, Vishnu, and Maheshwar. We often think about this, trio, three gods. So, I think the idea of evolution that we have in the work of Sri Aurobindo is a fine blending of the Western perspective and Indian perspective both. So instead of mechanical view of evolution, he provides a spiritual view of evolution. Now, Satchidananda is the source, and we want to move to live, to create a world which is completely divinized. दिव्यता का प्रकाश पूरे विश्व में हो. The goal is Satchidananda. And how it can be done, for that he talks about integral yoga. So yoga is expansion of the divine in humanity. There are many profound statements. All life is yoga. I think Dr. Monica Gupta will be touching these aspects, so I am not going to that. Let me elaborate the notion of evolution as pointed out by my former, the earlier speakers this morning. We human beings are evolutionary beings. We have this potential of evolution. And we are exploring, we are expressing our, and in human beings, we have become self-conscious. Now, self-conscious is one development, but further evolution is also possible. And that evolution is possible through a conscious collaboration between Nar and Narayana. You have to relate to the higher consciousness. Now, if you see the whole scenario, and if you try to examine the whole development, you see that there is some relationship between cosmos and individual, between microcosm and cosmos. Individual is conceived as a microcosm and can also be seen as one which contains the entire cosmic developmental potential with the secret recesses of its own self. Now, the potential can be realized by evolution of consciousness. Sri Aurobindo talks about three processes. One is deepening of consciousness. Through deepening of consciousness, one can access psychic being or divine self within lives, deep within our hearts. This is deepening. The second is widening the consciousness. By widening the consciousness, one can live in the universal or the cosmic divine self. And then he talks of heightening of consciousness, deepening, widening, and heightening of consciousness. One can reach the heights of supramental consciousness and live in the supreme or the transcendental self. Now, I have already mentioned that involution precedes evolution. The secret of the evolutionary process can be fathomed according to Sri Aurobindo only if we understand that the highest divine consciousness, whom we call God, Brahman, or Spirit, has plunged itself or involved itself into its own self-created opposite. In conscience, the matter. So spirit comes to matter, in simple words, and tries to manifest itself in that reluctant substance. And when this manifestation comes true, when it is realized, then you find change, evolution takes place. Now, the all-conscious plunked in conscience. All blissful has put on a huge insensibility out of which it struggles by pain, hunger, desire, and sorrow. Now, the change which takes place in terms of evolution is therefore directed in the direction of becoming divine. How to move towards that? And in this way, evolution becomes a process of liberation of consciousness from inconscient, liberation of consciousness from inconscient into the process of its release from matter. The emergence of life is the first step, and the emergence of mind is the second step. However, evolution moves further, and the mind seeks to release itself progressively into the highest consciousness. I would like to quote the words of Sri Aurobindo. Evolution is the emancipation of a self-revealing soul, secret, in form and force, the slow becoming of a Godhead, the growth of a spirit. In this evolution, mental man is not the goal and end, the completing value, the highest lost significance. He is too small and imperfect to be the crown of all this travel of nature. Man is not final, but middle term only, a transitional being, an instrumental intermediate creature. Evolution has not stopped here. Man has to evolve. If you look at the stages, the 7 stages, the supramental stage and all that, which perhaps Monica ji will be talking about, that shows that evolution of consciousness has a perspective, and I think the process is incomplete. In psychology, we have great talk about ego, about self, S with small s. And all processes are taken care of according to that. The whole, design of psychology is around that. And if you look in the glossary of psychology, you will find that there are at least 70 words where self is used as an epithet. You have self-esteem, self-determination, and whatnot. As a matter of fact, one of our senior friends at Yale University has written a book. The title is The Course of Self. You know, self has become a problem. This egoistic self is a true problem. You have depression, you have neuroticism, you have all kinds of problems. That's not the topic for today's discussion, but it requires our serious attention that, overemphasis on ego and realizing everything around that, revolving around that is quite problematic. So the process of evolution, as meaningful, as purposive, makes sense when we relate it to the entire process of involution and evolution, ascent and descent. Both are involved in it. We should not be prisoners of mechanical process of evolution. We have within us the possibility of becoming thinking, aspiring, self-conscious beings, and find ways to evolve beyond the mind into greater consciousness. So, this is the divine plan of creation. Now, how this kind of movement takes place, Sri Aurobindo attends to the issue of perfecting your mind as an instrument. In fact, the word in Sanskrit is antahakarana. Mind is an instrument. And it is through mind, it is through sharpening that. In fact, the science of yoga is one which does something called inner engineering. And how you do that, how you move towards that, has not been attended to by psychologists. There has been a lot of attention about the various aspects of, consequences of awareness. And various states of consciousness they talk about. You have, altered states of consciousness and whatnot. But consciousness as such has not been understood. You have consciousness of, but not consciousness as such. This is the area of exploration where we need to attend to. Human evolution towards perfection is possible through progressive psychicization. I had very briefly mentioned that becoming more and more aware about that Chaitya Purusha and its activities, that is psychicization. Spiritualization is another process, and supramentalization of consciousness is another process. And supramentalization is also termed as Gnostic consciousness, which goes beyond the individual. Now, the meaning and purpose and sense of evolution is one. And that is manifestation of life divine on earth. How to do that? The answer is integral yoga. The goal of this whole intervention is to build something called Gnostic society. Now, there is a vision, there is a view, there is a perspective that Life divine is a complete reversal of what we are saying, the present law of human consciousness and life. Why? Because the present functioning is on the basis of consciousness of ignorance. In psychological terms, it operates through the agency of the ego. Now, moving beyond that, agnostic being is one who finds himself or herself not only in fulfillment of its own, but in the fulfillment of others. I think Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam was mentioned by one of the speakers. A simple word in psychology is empathy. But it's more than that. It's not empathy, but more than that. So the mind, life, and the physical being of the other is felt as one's own. If you read Srimad Bhagavad Gita, it uses the word Atma Upamya, that you consider the other as yourself. You view like that. So, the mind, life, and physical being of the other is felt as one's own through identity and results a deep soul harmony that becomes the basis of collective divine life. That is the possibility. So, the Gnostic being is one where there is unity, where there is mutuality, where there is harmony, a life which is divine, which is true, which is beautiful. So the Gnostic being is a free and blissful instrument of the Lord, through whom he does his wondrous works in this world. The key points that emerge in this perspective is, and I see that here is Bhagavad Gita, which says that, well, and I read somewhere that in Sri Aurobindo's view also, we have many thoughts in our mind. We think that we are thinking. It's wrong. Thoughts come because of Prakriti. And you assume that you are thinking, you are acting. So this sense of karta, sense of agency, this sense of ego, that creates the problem. You are being used, you are nimitta. The spirit is expressed through you. You are not the owner. You are not expressing yourself. I think it's broadening the perspective of self, which is the most important contribution. There is one more thing that, evolution is continuously taking place. Yoga, integral yoga, can expedite this process, compress the time, and the change can take place. So, it is the inner challenge that is before us, and the main problem with ego is that ego divides. It divides between me, my, mine, and the other. Now you need to go beyond that. This egoistic view has to be replaced by a perspective which is love driven. Love is unitive, ego is separative. So, how this change can take place? A leap of consciousness is possible if we make effort. And it is important to realize that we need to listen, we need to work towards this goal to feel love and see oneness. And I think that is possibility for life. And that is the message that we get from Sri Aurobindo. Now, the perspective on consciousness and evolution, which is made available by the works from the works of Sri Aurobindo and the ideas that he has put before us, is profound in terms of its implications for human life, for living a life where there is a possibility of nothing less than realizing divinity, moving towards divinity, realizing, reaching to Satchidananda. I think these are some of the key ideas. And with these ideas, the whole analysis of human mind, the various stages, has been done by Sri Aurobindo. And there are many illustrations. The profound work of Sri Aurobindo that we have is in various forms. It's great poetry, it's great philosophy, it's great thoughtful, provocative analysis of life. I express my gratitude to the organizers for creating this opportunity. I think it's also part of the movement of consciousness that we are doing it. I'm hopeful that my senior colleagues, senior in study of Sri Aurobindo, Ms. Mehra and Dr. Monica Gupta, will provide us and help us to come closer to the ideas of Sri Aurobindo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Professor Geshwar Mishra ji, for a very erudite keynote speech that you have delivered this morning. Sir, it's been indeed a privilege for us to listen to you. You have illuminated on the key concepts and aspects of human evolution as discussed by Sri Aurobindo. You also mentioned that he was a Yuga Purush. Very truly, you gave glimpses of his life and personality, his literary contributions, his concept of absolute national autonomy, integral yoga and synthesis of yoga, spirituality. Especially, you dwelt upon the key concepts and criticality of evolution and involution, the two concepts. Then you went on to explain what Sri Aurobindo has spoken about the supermind and supramental consciousness and Satchidananda, the God divine, and finally the divinization of man. And you touched upon many more critical aspects that Sri Aurobindo spoke about. Thank you so much, sir, for your very, very enlightening keynote speech. Thank you, sir. Now, before I invite our next speaker, Amita Mehraji, let me give a brief introduction of her. She is the chairperson and founding trustee of the Gnostic Center in Delhi, which is a Center for Growth of Consciousness and Consciousness Study. He is also the chairperson of founding trustee, International Center for Integral Studies, that specializes in Sri Aurobindo studies. She has been educated in Delhi University, Lady Shri Ram College, Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad, and in Kentucky, United States of USA, United States of America. She has received many awards and have got positions. She was the youngest member ever appointed on the governing body of Aurobindo by Government of India. She also received a Certificate of Merit for Outstanding Organizational Ability and Leadership from Lady Shri Ram College, University of Delhi. She has been editor of Awakening Ray, a research journal for the growth of consciousness. She's been a teacher, guide, and course designer in integral education, management, psychology, Indian studies, and yoga of Sri Aurobindo at Gnostic Center. She's been a trainer for in-service and pre-service teacher education for Delhi University and selected school, visiting faculty at Sri Sringeri Sharda Institute of Management, chairperson of United Nations of Youth, among many more. She's been a teacher at Mirambika. She has designed and taught courses to collegiate and professionals. She has also launched many study programs to do with many of Sri Aurobindo's published works and Sri Mothers, such as Essays on the Gita, Savitri, a legend and symbol, The Life Divine, The Mother, Secret of the Veda, The Synthesis of Yoga. She has also delivered a number of invited lectures to university teaching staff and students. Some of her published works include The Mother on the Education, Sadhana, a Guide to Self-Mastery, Karma Yoga, Perfection in Work, Dhyana, Meditation for Inner Growth, The Journey, and Where We Don't Go. Besides this, she has a large number of research articles on consciousness studies and Sri Aurobindo, among others. With that brief introduction, now I invite Amita Mehraji to deliver her speech on 9 Gems in Savitri, a Mystic Exploration. She is going to give us an overview of some of the important aspects of Savitri, which makes it a truly world epic. Savitri is the longest poem ever written in English language, with 24,000 verses written in lambic pentameter. This talk explores the hidden jewels of knowledge and revolution in Savitri. We invite Amita Mehraji to deliver her speech. Amita ji.
Amita, you are on mute. You are on mute.
So, very good afternoon, and thank you so much for inviting me here, Nandini ji and all the senior staff of IGNOU. And after listening to the Girishwar Mishra ji's very profound talk, I think that the subject of my talk quite easily from there. I would like to today, talk about the relevance of Savitri and also some of the need for Savitri. I had written 9 gems, but 9 gems in Savitri is a very long talk. When I heard the time limit, I immediately have compressed it and made it, modified it a bit, so that we can finish it in the time, and also it can give you the sense and the kernel of the matter. Of course, those who are interested in reading and knowing about the other gems in Savitri, there is a written and published article that I have called The 9 Gems in Savitri. We can always send it to Nandini ji and she can pass it on. But today, I'd like to start with the words of the mother. When she talks about Savitri, she says, Savitri is a marvelous prophetic poem which will be humanity's guide towards the future realization. She uses the word marvelous prophetic poem, prophecy. The word prophetic seems to indicate that it is something that will happen in the future. And the second point that she makes is it is humanity's guide towards its future realization. Now, if we look at scripture and we look at all kinds of words that have been the scripture for us, for example, Gita, or you look at the Vedas and the Upanishads, you will see that there is an element of both prophecy in it and also a guide for the humanity. These are books of wisdom, of knowledge, of deep revelation. And that is why they are perennial. They continue in the consciousness of the race of humanity from age to age, from yuga to yuga. And their appeal is eternal and perennial. You can see the Bhagavad Gita especially has been a book that has been studied and practiced for centuries here. In the same way, Savitri is what the mother calls the Veda of the future. Now, why does she call it the Veda of the future? Because, as Mishraji pointed out, Sri Aurobindo's yoga is the evolutionary yoga of the growth of consciousness and the change of consciousness to a new consciousness which is described as Gnostic or supramental. So it is the Veda of the future because it is a book that can be our guide and will be our guide for future generations towards what Sri Aurobindo life was dedicated to, and which is the establishment of the life divine on earth. This incredible synthesis of spirit and matter, of not leaving aside material reality, the world, and escaping into a spiritual oblivion or spiritual eternity. It is this life divine which he has spent his whole life bringing down and creating the possibility of, which is what is encapsulated in his work. Now, we are entering into the 150th celebration, the anniversary of Sri Aurobindo's 150th birth anniversary. This is an extremely important time. I remember the mother, she said, she'll continue to live. She says, 1972 was the 100th anniversary of Sri Aurobindo. And I remember how much the mother, how much importance she gave to that event. And she said, it is extremely important that the country and the world celebrate and recognize Sri Aurobindo. In the same way, the reason I chose to speak on Savitri as a homage to him for this 150th birth anniversary is because Savitri contains everything. It contains the future realization, the past wisdom, the answers to all our questions and the problems that beset us. Today, you know that we've passed through an unprecedented time in the world with the pandemic, with coronavirus. And all of us are searching for answers and saying, why did this happen? What, besides the outer reasons and conspiracy theories, we're not going into that. But what are the inner dimensions and reasons for the pandemic? What is brought upon out this incredible world event where everybody has had to sit back and re-examine everything that we've been told is the way to do things. And why has it happened? We also see that terrorism, divisions, war, and all the things that humanity has been with for the past millenniums, hundreds and hundreds of years, has not stopped. There is still terrorism going on at the borders. There are still attacks going on some way or the other. Some countries at war with another. We also see that there is anger, hatred, enmity, jealousy amongst us as human beings, in our communities, in our societies, in our universities. Now, how is this going to change? And that is the important question. And that is the relevance of Savitri. How is this going to change? This question was asked and has been asked by all of us. Every philosopher, every scientist, every yogi has always asked these questions. How do we change human nature? Because unless there is a change in human nature, society can't change. And if there is no change in human nature and no change in society, the world will not change. And here I come to the central purpose and need for Savitri. The important thing is the growth of consciousness. If we have to change the world as it is, from a world of war and division and disharmony to a world of unity, mutuality, and harmony, the three key words of the Gnostic consciousness, the three key words of the supramental consciousness, the new consciousness that Savitri embodies. If we want to do that, then we need to work towards and we need to understand the need for a growth of consciousness and a change of human nature. If human nature does not change, the problems that beset human nature will not change. This is a given. And how do we change human nature? This is where I come to Savitri. Savitri is a book that has been written for those who are aspiring to change their consciousness, who are aspiring to change and develop a deeper consciousness, a more wider consciousness, a higher consciousness, a consciousness that embodies all, that is all pervasive, that gets rid of the ego and replaces the ego with the psychic being or the inner being of truth and light and beauty. That is why Savitri has been written. Savitri itself is a legend and a symbol. The legend, of course, you know, is from the Mahabharata. Savitri is about Savitri and Satyavan. Satyavan represents the soul of the earth. Savitri is the divine word, the goddess of the sun. She represents a supramental knowledge and light. And Satyavan, when she is Savitri in the Mahabharata also, Savitri brings back Satyavan from death. It is the conquest of death, and it is the establishment of immortality as a principle in evolution. Now, if you read Savitri, you will see that there are some, I would only mention 5 things that anybody who goes to Savitri can gain from it. First, Savitri has the ability, it's 24,000 verses in iambic pentameter. Do you know, Can you imagine? It's the longest epic written in the English language. It exceeds the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, and the Odyssey, and all the other epics, Dante's, Paradiso, and so on. This is this epic that he wrote. He wrote from a very high overmental, supramental consciousness. He called it the highest consciousness of the mind, which he said most of it came from a very high level of consciousness. And therefore, Savitri has a mantric power in the lines. And therefore, there is this iambic pentameter. I will read you some verses and you will understand the rhythm and the mantric quality of Savitri. Without understanding that, that is how the power of Savitri actually enters into the being. The mother has said, if you want to understand Savitri, you have to grow new brain cells. The gray matter that you have needs to become golden matter, which means new cells are required. The old consciousness finds it difficult to understand Savitri. That is why a lot of people, when they pick up Savitri, put it down, because they can't understand it. So she gives two very important clues. And students who are listening and are interested in reading Savitri, these are the two ways of reading Savitri. One, read it out aloud. Two, read it with a quiet mind. Three, when you read Savitri, read it once, read and leave the passage, read it again. And the passage will soon begin to make sense. It takes time. Sometimes 6 months or a year, or sometimes 1 month, depending on how conscious you are. When the new cells develop, Savitri opens up. And that is how a mantra works. What is a mantra? A mantra is a combination of words which has a meaning deeper than the outer formation of the words. The knowledge of the mantra and the wisdom of the mantra enters to the mind of the hearer, not from the outer formation of the words or meaning of the words, but from the inner symbolism of the words. Similarly, the whole of Savitri, 24,000 verses, is written in is pure mantra. It is mantric in quality, mantric in substance, mantric in its vibrations. In fact, the mother said that if you listen to Savitri and the rhythm and the sound of Savitri, each line ends with the sonority of Om. So can you imagine? When you're listening to Savitri, it is also a kind of a japa, you can say, a mantric Om that takes place. So this is the one of the most important, need and reasons why we should read Savitri. The second is its healing power. Now, this is important. We have gone through a terrible time of coronavirus, and everybody is scared, and there's fear, and people don't know what to do, how to protect themselves. Well, read Savitri. Savitri can help you to protect yourself from all illnesses. In fact, there was a time when I was at the ashram and I was reading Savitri, and I went to meet Amal Kiran, and he told me that, when he had a fracture, Amalda was a writer and a disciple of Sri Aurobindo, living at the time of Sri Aurobindo. And when he had a fracture, he fell down. He asked Sri Aurobindo, "Oh, you're writing from an over-mental consciousness. Is there any verse that can actually heal my physical fracture?" And Sri Aurobindo actually sent him that verse. He said, there are certain passages in Savitri that are so full of power, they can even heal physical deformities and physical fractures. So you can imagine on the mental level and the psychological level how much power Savitri holds. The third gem of Savitri, or the third reason we need to read Savitri and the relevance of Savitri, is its fantastic exposition on the evolutionary need for pain. What is pain? Why do we experience pain? Why is there pain in this world? Pain is the hammer of the gods to chisel man to perfection. And why And when can pain turn to bliss? So all these questions are asked in Savitri. And Savitri has passages and passages explaining those. The fourth reason and the relevance of Savitri today is that Savitri presents a new prototype of the woman. Now, you may know that, the avataric tradition has been from Ramayana. The hero of all our epics have been men so far. Sri Ram has been the hero of Ramayana. He was an avatar. He brought to humanity the idea of the moral, the mental man, chaste in his ethics. Then came the Mahabharata, and in Mahabharata, the great protagonists of Mahabharata, Sri Krishna, the avatar, and Arjuna, the perfect disciple, who again represents the over-mental idea of dharma and doing dharma. Whether it was Buddha or Christ or whoever it may be, the avatars or Muhammad, so far, in all the epics, the avatars or the great beings, you can call them, have been men. Now here is a book that Sri Aurobindo writes, where the main protagonist is a woman. And who is she? She is an avatar. She is the embodiment of the Supreme Mother who has come down on earth in a human body. Here is an epic for the first time where Sri Aurobindo is pointing to the future. In fact, he even told the mother that for the new being, for the supramental Gnostic being, it is the woman who will first embody it. She will carry that power because she has the strength to be able to embody that consciousness. And this is a new prototype of the avatar, which is very important, especially today, and especially in India. We see that because of various reasons all over the world, I think the rise and the intellect of women, the development and the growth of the feminine consciousness has been to some extent been, pushed back for various reasons, historical and otherwise. But here it's very important that unless this feminine consciousness is developed in all of us, not just women, but even men, and this consciousness of the mother, the compassion, the essential need for unity and harmony, love, the principle of love, unless that is developed in human consciousness, there can be no further growth and evolution. That is the key principle of Savitri. In fact, there's a whole book and there's debates on love and death. And do you know what is the greatest power? Somebody asked the mother, what is the greatest power on earth? And she replied very simply, love. And even in Savitri, it is love that can conquer death. It is love that conquers death. And Savitri embodies that love. Lastly, Savitri is a book of revelation. And by revelation, I mean that if you were to just concentrate for a few minutes and open Savitri to any page with a question in your mind, you will receive an answer, an illumination. Now that great books of scripture have that ability and that power. And therefore, Savitri can be used for that purpose. In fact, I'd like to read here what the mother has said. Beautiful passage. If you are depressed, if you feel miserable, if you do not succeed in what you do, or else if what happens is always the contrary of what you expect, however much you try, if it has come to such a pass that you lose your temper, life becomes disgusting, and you are unhappy, then immediately take Savitri, and after a moment's concentration, open it at any page and read. You will see that all your misery disappears like smoke, and you will have the strength to overcome the worst sorrows. You will no longer feel that which was tormenting you. Instead, you will feel a strange happiness, a reversal of consciousness, along with the energy and force to conquer everything, as though there was nothing impossible. And you will feel this inexhaustible joy that purifies everything. Well, I'd like to end by reading one passage of Savitri, just to give you a sense of what Savitri sounds like. This is on mantra. As when the mantra sinks in yoga's ear, its message enters stirring the blind brain and keeps in the dim, ignorant cells its sound. The hearer understands a form of words, and musing on the index thought it holds, he strives to read it with the laboring mind, but finds bright hints, not the embodied truth. Then, falling silent in himself to know, he meets the deeper listening of his soul. The word repeats itself in rhythmic strains. Thought, vision, feeling, sense, the body's self are seized unutterably, and he endures an ecstasy and an immortal change. He feels a wideness and becomes a power. All knowledge rushes in him like a sea, transmuted by the white spiritual ray. He walks in naked heavens of joy and calm, sees the God face, and hears transcendent speech. Well, this is what happens to us when we read Savitri. This is the supreme mantra that Sri Aurobindo has given to humanity, the Veda of the future, the book of Revelation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amita Mehra ji, for enlightening us and introducing us to a gem, an epic called Savitri, composed by Sri Aurobindo. In your speech, you have chosen a few select gems from Savitri and illuminated upon them. You spoke about the need and relevance of Savitri and its prophecy, and that it presents us with a wisdom for future. You also spoke about Aurobindo's yoga is the new consciousness, and Savitri embodies the very concept about how to make a Gnostic man. How do we change man's nature? And here we come to Savitri, the epic. You also dealt at length the concepts of supramental consciousness and mantric quality of Savitri, and that Savitri presents itself as the Veda of the future. It is such a jewel and a source of new knowledge. Thank you so much, Amita Mehra ji. It's been wonderful listening to us and enlightening us on aspects of Savitri, which is otherwise such a difficult study. Now, we invite Monica Gupta ji. Monica ji is here. Monica Gupta ji, a very brief introduction. She teaches in the Department of Elementary Education in Gargi College, University of Delhi. With a background in psychology and child development, Dr. Gupta has keen interest in areas of integral education and integral psychology, which are so central to the study of Sri Aurobindo. Her doctoral thesis in psychology, Sri Aurobindo's Discourse on Human Development, a metaphysical study, has been published as a book by Springer, and her work has been highly acclaimed. Dr. Gupta has also been associated with the Gnostic Center and has facilitated online courses such as Towards the Light Within, Psychology of Human Development, and Introduction to Integral Studies. She is going to speak on the integral psychology of Sri Aurobindo. This talk explores Sri Aurobindo's vision of psychology as a science of consciousness. It examines the complexity of human personality, how it needs to be individualized, subtilized, and integrated for a complete fruition of human and divine possibilities. So now we invite Dr. Monica Gupta ji for her speech on integral psychology of Sri Aurobindo. Monica ji.
Ma'am, please unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, be a little loud, Monica ji.
Okay. Okay, so deep salutations to all who are present here today. It has been a wonderful morning, being immersed in listening to Sri Aurobindo. And I'd like to sort of take this discourse forward and especially from Sri Aurobindo's vision of psychology and the insights that it may give rituals, and especially the way in which his insights can act to the discipline of psychology and add to it. I'll begin with three important statements that Sri Aurobindo made on psychology. Sri Aurobindo says psychology is a science of consciousness and its operations. He says it's a subjective science where we begin from the understanding of the self and then move to understanding the others. And the third very important statement that he says, gives us, is practical psychology. Now, these three statements together have a lot to give to psychology as a discipline. Let's go back a little bit in time and the age in which Aurobindo was writing these thoughts. It was a very time that an age that was dominated by the thoughts of Charles Darwin, Freud, Karl Marx, Nietzsche. All these people were writing time, and there was a lot of excitement in terms of wanting to self of the moral repressions and the religious repressions of the past, wanting a society that was just and equitable, and that was the time in which his thoughts. And there was a freedom, there was a press towards wanting to free the natural man. But then also, in a sense, he also recognized that the vitals of a human being need not be suppressed and need to be recognized, perfected. But he at the same time, knew that the vital by itself cannot give self-fulfillment to a human being because of downs of desire. So what he did was that he sort of gave a stabilized influence of the heights of Indian philosophy to psychology and created an understanding of psychology which sort of brings together the Prakriti and the Purusha, the becoming. And even till today, if you see mainstream psychology, you will find ideas are still to be expressed within mainstream psychology. The focus on becoming in psychology, the external becomings of the surface self, understanding the behavior, understanding what is happening to us. But this whole science immersiveness, where you shift the focus within and becoming where it becomes rooted, and also the being within, that requires a shift in psychological processes that not only need to be explored, also need to become a part of discipline of psychology per se. In his own words, it's like the ecstatic dance of Shiva, which multiplies the body of God numberlessly to views. When you have the stability, you also have these movements of becoming that are within. So this was the vision of Aurobindo in terms of psychology, that psychology needs to marry being and becoming together. He was familiar with, for example, thoughts of Freud. And Freud focused a lot on the subconscious aspects. And he agreed with the fact that there is inconscient or subconscient in an individual. But at the same time, the higher, the superconscient realm. And he felt that, the secret flowers, he likened the lotus to us, to the consciousness that is blooming. And the secret of this cannot quite be found by analyzing the mud in which it grows. The secret of the lotus, you actually have to understand the higher consciousness from the artist has descended. And that somewhere is the crux of the idea of integral psychology. Basically, what he's saying is to solve the problems of everyday life, that we, the movements ahead, if we want to make progressive movements, we will not focus on or remain within the problem consciousness, but to be able to rise above it into a higher light, to ascend to the higher light and bring down the light into our own being. So this ascent of consciousness and this descent of the light into the consciousness are two movements that can solve a lot of problems for us. And according to him, all problems of existence are essentially problems of harmony. So we need to understand, how do we harmonize our lives? There is nothing in life that needs to be rejected. His view was a very life-affirming view. It was not an essentially rejected view. So what he wanted to do was that as we are living, when we ascend to a higher consciousness, the higher consciousness gives us integrality and a possibility of a higher form of expression that can solve the current crisis that we are in. We ascend in consciousness. At the same time, there needs to be sufficient receptive in the being to be able to receive this light, and that can be done with the daily self-concentration. In Sanskrit, the word samarpan, the samarpan of the being to the divine. So, according, each part of the being can be affected, even the surface self affected. Our senses, our mind, our emotions, all are said, going back, for example, to the Vedas, they are like the devas, that need to be within us. So this body, this mind, our senses are not to be left in search of some high, reality. But these themselves can be divine, a part of the life divine. And that is somewhere the base of his. The shift within can come through stilling the outer being, infusing it with power, the practices of Nidhyasana, All these practices can actually help us within. And sorry, just and for this is a very new and exciting area of development and intentional development that has emerged, because largely even within psychology, when you look at the human developmental processes, they're largely seen as unfolding. Largely it's its nature. But with Aurobindo's vision of psychology, what he gives is that he gives emphasis on how we can take the reins of this development in our own hands, collaboration of the human and the divine within us, and literally create this reality, the new forms within us. And these are of very practical use. Yoga is a practical psychology. There's a practical use to it. For example, a teacher classroom, if she can still her mind and quieten the mental noise, be able to understand the possibilities, the unique possibilities that lie within her student, and be able to listen deeply, hear deeply to whatever they are saying. Sharp interesting, principle of teaching. He says nothing can be taught. Which bhi sikhaya nahi ja sakta. Is that you can be that medium, that person, can listen. The psychological space for an individual to express his or her own potential, individuality. Similarly, a healer, for example, if a healer can be a yogi, still his consciousness, still the person healing the disturbed energies, the haste, agitation, can find a kind of a creative in the being of the healer, the person who's living. So these, the possibility of creating this new consciousness within us, and that is why Aurobindo says that essentially psychology is a subject. He as he was writing, he knew the shape that psychology was taking. And he said that there were three main errors, major errors that psychology was making as a discipline. What he said was the objective error. To study everything from the outside in, study behavior, to see how to control people. It was all about the other people. It was not about the first error he said that psychologists were making was the objective error. And psychology needs to become, because there is a laboratory within us. And this laboratory of consciousness of the problems that we are facing day to day can become, each self can become a way of evolution. So that's the first thing. Second thing that he said was that psychology needs to avoid a material error. That means to locate everything, all psychological processes within the body, to physiology, to reduce consciousness to the brain, for example. And the third error was the skeptic error would say what I cannot see does not exist. And he said that, spirituality, by itself may not be in that sense, but it does exist, and there's sufficient body of knowledge across the world to, how that there is a lot of people experience these states similarly. So the skeptic error also needs to be avoided, and we somewhere struggle in mainstream psychology to be able to overcome these things, I feel, even till today. So psychology, according to him, is a subjective science, and according to him, there are, if we live in the surface consciousness, there are many frontal, representational cells, that we go within, which need to be integrated, and there is only that one true self within, tapped in case we want to move from a surface individuality to what we define or the Gnostic individuality that is aware of its purpose, that is, why it exists, whose actions come from the depths then. So this shift from a surface personality to that is rooted in the inner psychic being is very, very important. Interestingly, of course, psychology is largely about individuals, but he also talks about the collective. That there are collective, there is also the collective self that exists. And the difference between false subjectivity and true subjectivity is very important to be able to negotiate the development of both individual and society. The criteria of underactivity would be something that joins, something that includes, something that harmonizes. And what is false subjectivity? False subjectivity would be that polarizes, something that excludes, something that hates, something that. So he wanted to divide, wanted to distinguish between. For example, if we take, this concept of the nation's soul, according to him, a false nationalism would be a kind of a nationalism that is exclusive, based on hate, that is based on creating this sense of the us and them, whereas a true nationalism would be something that can give a nation an inclusivity and a true flowering of its soul. So I feel are very, very useful, not just for the individual, but also for in the collective that we live in today. He talked about the fact that we have different parts, the physical being, the mental being, the vital being, psychic, and the spiritual. And he talked about a hierarchy of consciousness. And according to him, consciousness is a fundamental reality. It is very fun. It is Swayam Prakash. It has light of its own. And this whole cosmos, to the macrocosm, is made up of layers of consciousness. And we have these layers. And there are layers of consciousness below, of which we are not aware, and consciousness above, which we are yet not aware. And the task, it's interesting how psychology becomes a science of consciousness and its operations would be, how we can ascend to the next level to be able to lower level. So according to him, the higher you go, the deeper you can heal. So the more you ascend, the more you can heal, for example, the problems of dreams and the inconscient, which is largely a very fragmented consciousness. And the layers that are higher than the mind, for example, would be the higher mind, the human mind, the overmind, and the supermind. And as you ascend higher and higher in there is greater and greater light, effulgence of light that is then recreating your emotions, recreating the mind, recreating even the body. For example, if you were to move beyond the normal human mind on higher mind, the higher mind could give you, say, possibilities of phenomenon from multiple vantage points simultaneously. We general with this, to take multiple points of view and coordinate them, but in a higher mind, a simultaneity, there would be what is called a circularity of thought. So these are very, and I feel should become a part of, how we understand people, how we educate, what kind of environment we create around them, what kind of, for example, educational create? Do we just create, very mechanical structures, or, devoid of any light, which are devoid of any space to relate with nature, to relate with a higher being? Or is it something geared much more towards a professional ego formation? These are some of the questions that one. And here, in terms of ascending, he used a very interesting point. What he said was ascent, widening, and integration. He says into a higher level of consciousness, there is a widening in the being. A higher level. There are many more powers of the being that open up and inclusive. They include rather than exclude. And water consciousness, that is not left behind. It is subtilized, it is integrated into the next stage of evolution. So evolution sense moves forward, taking what was the past of us, into a higher form. So that's another very interesting principle. That talking that, particularly strikes me as very interesting. He, like a psychological scientist, knew that each principle that we manifest is a part of evolution, and it plays a process. For example, things like desire, mind, effort, rationality, animality, all have played their role in human evolution. And desire would energize, it sort of releases energy. Effort we need. Ego is a kind of a self-concentration of divine, in a sense. The animality too is essential for, affirming yourself in this world for creation. So he understood these were evolutionary principles, but the same principle that aids us till a point of time also becomes a point and needs to be overcome. So desire was the helper, and desire is ego was the helper, and ego is the bar. Effort was the helper, and animality was the helper, animality is the bar. So these are very important, and also I think give a very compassionate and self-compassion to a person who practices these attitudes of understanding that looking at people developing, for example, there should be no haste, hurry, agitation, and see how each principle is evolving and how it is taking a high, and how we can see this, through this whole process, see through the of evolution. And so this also reminds me of, a verse from the says that into darkness enter those people who follow, ignore a greater darkness those who follow the light alone. So ignorance and knowledge held in an integral view for us to have a complete view of this world and its reality and the way in which it is evolving. And so with, sure, there is higher knowledge and then there is lower knowledge. And lower knowledge largely, we start from the outside and we try to move inside. So it is outside. This higher knowledge is a knowledge that flowers from within, moves towards outside. And he said all disciplines of knowledge, whether there are arts or psychology, all need to shift movement of inside out rather than outside in. For example, psychodiscipline. It would make the shift if we can see that psychology is a discipline that studies the relationship with all things and beings, but all things and beings, how we are integrally connected with this entire house, the flowers, the plants, matter, with rain clouds, each thing becomes a part of our own being. And that is the meeting of the material and the spiritual. And I'm audible, but I just like to say that it is invocation of that mystic fire within, that inner Veda, to the listening to the footsteps of divine within our own hearts, that a new psychology can within us. And with those words, I'll end.
Thank you, Dr. Monica ji, for an extremely enlightening speech of yours on the integral psychology of Sri Aurobindo. Although I could not hear you very clearly because of connectivity problem, but you mentioned about the important aspects of integral psychology of Sri Aurobindo, such as psychology as science of consciousness, practical psychology. And it was wonderful to hear that Aurobindo stabilized the mind of human philosophy through psychology. And Sri Aurobindo elaborated upon the psychological processes, and that there is commonality with Freud's concept of subconsciousness. You also mentioned about how to harmonize our life, how to ascend to this next level of consciousness, evolutionary principles, ego, self. You touched upon higher knowledge, and finally, integral connectivity of spirituality with material world. Thank you, Dr. Monica Gupta ji, for a wonderful speech of yours.
Thank you so much.
Now, I request my colleague, Dr. Sadanand Sahu, to render the vote of thanks. Dr. Sahu.
Thank you, Professor Nandini. And in fact, I was enjoying so much, I thought it should not end so abruptly. Almost 2 hours, it was so much, exploratory and going deeper and deeper. And I thank you personally on behalf of our school, Professor Girishwar Mishra, Dr. Amita Mehra, Dr. Monica Gupta. You brought so many very deep level of thought, which are very important for contemporary society. Especially 3 of you brought how we should actually, ego is a big problem in today's world, either at the individual level or community or national level. We should actually cultivate inclusivity and love, compassion. That was the key takeaway from all 3 talks. I thank all 3 of you for bringing those issues which are very relevant in contemporary society. I thank our Honorable VC, Professor Nageshwar Rao, for giving all support to organize these events. From very frequently, he has been supporting all these events. And Professor S. Kukrati, our Honorable PVC, who has been with us and delivered the inaugural address also. She has been very kind and supportive and always there to help us. Thank you, Madam. I also thank Professor Sachi Shah, our director, who has been behind the scene, in front of the scene, steering all these events so nicely and so effectively. Thank you, Professor Nandini Sinha Kapoor. You conceptualized the entire, event so nicely and brought so many, very good speakers who have lifelong knowledge in this the studies and in their own domain also. And I thank all our faculty members in our school, all Professor Boynarupini, Dr. Professor Subhangi Vaidya, Dr. Venkatesh, Dr. Kuman, Dr. Diksha, and Dr. Susmita, and all our colleagues in the IGNOU. I especially thank Asutosh, Dr. Asutosh, who has been again behind the scene with Professor Nandini. She has been working very hard to make this event successful. And I thank Rajesh ji. Rajesh ji has been very key person who is covering entire event across the media. You can see online this event in Facebook and other platform. Rajesh ji, thank you so much. And I thank all our IGNOU faculty from across the country who have joined in this program, and all our students of philosophy and our own student, SYT students, for making this event so enjoyable, successful. And thank you so much, everybody, once again. Goodbye.
Thank you, Dr. Sao.
Thank you, everyone, for attending the seminar. Thanks to all the eminent speakers.
Thank you, Professor Sachi.
Thank you.